ATM Eric, paying people too much money, bringing in too much talent, hiring anybody that comes across from WWE. These are all the same things that I was criticized for. And rather than going, yeah, I remember Eric did that, WCW did that, I'm not going to do that, Tony did the same thing.
I do want to bring up Tony Khan. You know, I spoke to you a year ago, and you guys didn't seem to be as polite about each other as you had been a year before that. And 2022 seems to have got a little bit worse with just how you guys have kind of spoken about each other. He's had a very rough 2022 as a promoter, as an owner. How do you think he's done in handling? I'm not asking this facetiously. Sounds like I am. But how do you think he's done given the big dramas, the walkouts, the media scrums? How would you assess his performance?
Well, trying hard not to be critical. Look, Tony's learning on the job. All right. He's never run a wrestling company. You can be the biggest wrestling fan in the world. You can remember matches from 1973 and who did what finish to who and all that. You can be a walking, talking encyclopedia of professional wrestling. That doesn't necessarily make you a good television producer or a good wrestling promoter. It's not automatic. One doesn't necessarily equate to the other. And I think what Tony's going through right now is a learning curve, just like I did, just like I'm sure others have. Tony bit off a lot. He didn't slowly grow into the level of success that he's having, or the level of, I don't know if he's successful or not, to be honest with you. None of us do, because we don't see the numbers. We hear gross numbers, but we don't hear expenses, right? $1 million gate. Okay, well, if it costs you $1.4 million to do $1 million gate, that's not really a good story. But we hear the top line numbers all the time. We don't hear the back end numbers. But that's okay. We don't need to. I think, look, Tony has 2 shows on a top cable outlet. That in itself is a measure of success. Cannot be dismissed. It took a lot of investment. It took a vision. It took a lot to get that. And I don't mean to disrespect that or discount that. But I think the mistakes that Tony has made, and I predicted them, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back, but when I came out and, the quote that started it all was back in November when I said, shut up and wrestle. Quit talking about the competition. Quit comparing yourself to WWE. Quit trying to make it look like there's a war going on between your 2 companies, and just focus on a better product, because the audience will start telling everybody that you're a better product instead of you having to do it every week. Mm-hmm. And that's the first thing that caught my attention. The other thing was Tony tried really hard, I think, this is my impression, to create this illusion where it's the WCW, WWE, war again. But he wasn't able to or willing to do the things that WCW did to become successful, meaning going head to head and coming up with a better format and introducing a different presentation, and all of the elements that Nitro used to become the #1 wrestling company in the world were format elements. They were strategic elements. They were things that changed the wrestling industry, so much so that the WWF had to abandon their former business model and their former creative strategy and adapt to ours by coming up with the Attitude Era. That was a significant point in time and change in the industry that resulted in the Monday Night War. Tony just wanted to throw his name in the hat, say he's in the same business, and try to convince people that it was a war. And I thought that was a mistake, because it wasn't credible. It wasn't real. And by focusing on creating the illusion, and in fact, I think I called it cosplay wrestling, which was really brilliant of me, actually, because that's what it was, right? By creating this phony perception that there was a war between these 2 companies, when in fact it isn't a war. And I thought that was a strategic mistake because in the beginning, Tony had a lot of goodwill from the fans. Everybody wanted Tony to succeed, AEW to succeed, including me, by the way. Everybody wanted it to succeed. But when you start doing things and saying things that are no longer credible or sustainable, and you're creating a perception that people can see through, you begin to lose that goodwill. And losing that goodwill was a huge mistake. So that was one big mistake early on. And I tried to call it out constructively in the beginning, and it just escalated. The other one, though, is I think, Tony famously said, we're just not, AEW is back where WCW was in 1996. Well, that's bullshit, because WCW was #1 wrestling company in the country, by 1996. And we were outperforming WWE. By the end of 1996. I think Tony tried to grow by bringing in so much talent. And Tony said the famous comment was, "We're WCW where WCW was in 1996 only. We're not going to make the same mistakes." Let's take a look at 2022. Bringing in too much talent. ATM Eric, paying people too much money, bringing in too much talent, hiring anybody that comes across from WWE. These are all the same things that I was criticized for. And rather than going, yeah, I remember Eric did that, WCW did that, I'm not going to do that, Tony did the same thing. One of the biggest criticisms of AEW right now is if it's just got too many people. I mean, half of the people that he brought over to AEW brought over a year ago that made headlines were like game changers are now in the fucking witness protection program. I don't even know where they are. They're hiding somewhere. It's kind of crazy. And Tony has enough money. That's okay. He can afford it. And maybe there's a strategy there I don't know about, which is fine, possible. But what happens to the talent that you do depend on to drive your ratings, to fill your arenas, to keep people coming back, how do those people feel? I think that led to the MJF incident, right? What did MJF bitch about? He's one of their top talents. He's being paid down here. They're bringing in guys from WWE who don't even work on television that are making 2 or 3 times as much. Tony set himself up for the MJF debacle, right? Now it's turned out okay so far. We'll see. But he set himself up for that. That was not an ideal situation. I think the same could be said for CM Punk.
So Davey, when I saw him in the dressing room on the Saturday night, I was like, why did you call me? I've been trying to call you, and I was pretty mad at him. And he just, sometimes Davey was like a little brother or a little kid to me. And I remember he just confessed, he goes, I'm fucked. And he told me, he goes, he told me he'd been up with Jim Neidhart for 72 hours. They'd been doing cocaine for 3 straight days and he hadn't slept.